Good day to all of you. I am going to speak about the digital divide. I am going to speak about the causes, the consequences, and the concerns about the digital divide. It is not necessary that just because there is something called a divide that we are supposed to be very worried about it. It's not necessary that the consequences are going to be harmful. Just because I do not access Facebook or WhatsApp doesn't mean that I am missing out on something very important. But there can be very important elements of the digital divide that if I do not access, then it may affect me in a very serious manner. So, we are going to discuss today about what are the causes, the consequences, and the concerns of the digital divide. What's going to happen if there is a digital divide, and there is one, and what's going to happen if this digital divide is not addressed very soon. So, let's take a look at what the digital divide is. Let's try to find out what's the definition of this. There's a definition which is offered by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, and the term digital divide, according to OECD, refers to the gap between individuals, households, businesses, and geographic areas at different socio-economic levels with regard to both their opportunities to access information and communication technology and to their use of the internet for a wide variety of activities. So, the basic idea is that the digital divide that exists can exist within a household, it can exist globally, it can exist locally, it can be widespread across geographical areas within the same geographic area. There can be a very serious digital divide. So, you can have a small geographic area which is divided into rural and urban centers, and the urban centers will have greater access to information technology, and there will be fewer people in the rural areas accessing information technology. So, the term digital divide as such came into existence in the 1990s. This came into existence because in the US, people were very deeply worried back in the 90s about the spread, or rather I should say the uneven spread of digital technology. Since digital technology was coming up in a very big way in the 1990s in the United States and less so in other parts of the world, the US started worrying about what was really happening regarding the spread of the technology. How far was it spread across in their own country? And so they started studying, they started taking statistics. And so once they started taking statistics, they figured out that the matter was quite worrying. There was already a rural urban gap there, even within urban communities. Hispanics and blacks did not have that much access as the white people had. And so this was a matter of concern for them. Why was it a matter of concern? Well, that's something that we have to look at very closely actually, because the digital divide has worried people. Part of the reason for the worry is that if you do not have access to digital resources, then that affects your job opportunities. And more of the jobs that we do, they could be any job actually, that needs some kind of digital skills. So, if you are actually looking for a job today, not only must you be a literate person, but you must also be digitally literate. And that makes it very important for every single person who's entering into society and is entering into a particular kind of market, who wants a particular job. That person needs to be digitally literate. And so therefore this digital divide between rural and urban centers, within rural areas, within urban areas, that divide needs to be addressed. That's the reason why the US started worrying a lot about the digital divide. It's a technology that's not going to go away, just like we have aeroplanes, they are not going to go away. We have radio, that's not going to go away. We have all kinds of other technologies that we just cannot do without today. So we need these technologies to be made available to everyone, but for that we also need to understand who has it and who does not have it. Now there are two kinds of digital divide that we need to look at. The two kinds of digital divide are the access digital divide and usage digital divide. This was known immediately once people started investigating this. So you may have, well, one aspect is that you have no access to any digital resources. So maybe I do not have access to a computer, therefore I cannot access any digital resources, or I don't have access to a smartphone, so I don't have access to any digital resources. The other kind of digital divide is usage digital divide. So if I have access, but I may not be able to use the resource properly. I may have a computer, but I don't know what to do with it. Or maybe I just type on Microsoft Word in it, but I really don't use any of the other features in the computer. I may have internet, but I may not know what to do with the internet. I may not know how to search properly on the net. Since I'm addressing all academics here, it's very obvious that when we have, all of us have access to JSTOR to some extent, and when we use JSTOR, we may use it very differently from each other. So I may use it in a way which is very highly efficient, maybe I use it every day or something like that, but other academics may not necessarily use it every day or maybe even once in a month or something like that, because they may not have time or they may not know how to use it or what are the resources on it which are available to them. So many of us do not know which journals really are there on JSTOR and how do we access them. And for this we need some training and we need some method of organizing ourselves such that we can use those resources in a proper way. So the two kinds of digital divide that we have are the access digital divide and the usage digital divide. These are very basic divides. The access one is a very serious one, but the usage one is also considered very, very serious. So there was an article in Scientific American back in 2003 which was written by Warshauer, and he pointed out that the usage one was really the one that worried Americans the most, and it worried the academics the most as well, who were studying the digital divide, because they thought that even if you have access to a computer, that hardly means anything. Even if you have access to a smartphone, well, that hardly means anything. What you need is access to the way you can use the computer, use the smartphone in such a way such that it is of much more benefit to you. And so this usage matter is a far more serious matter than the access matter. The access can come. We have even in India back in even 1999 and even before that, much before that, computers were beginning to come in and they were being given to a number of people. So there were a lot of programs going on in India. One of them was called Gyan Doot, for instance, and this was covered in the Scientific American article in 2003. They pointed out that there are certain programs that were run in New Delhi which were not very successful. Why? Because they provided computers to poor kids, and the kids just played games on the computers and they really didn't know what to do with them. And there was really no supervision going on. So people were just given computers and they just played around with them, and really nothing much took place. And so the Gyandoot program, which is a little bit different than the earlier program, that succeeded a lot. There was a very significant effort to make sure that the people who accessed the computers knew what to do with it, and that's why the Gyandoot program was much more of a success. This was actually launched in the rural areas of Madhya Pradesh. And this was, even though it was not a very widespread program across India, it was concentrated in a particular area, it actually did some good work. So the usage divide is a very serious one, but of course the access divide is also a very serious one. So let's look at some statistics now. How many people have phones in the world? How many people have internet in the world? How many people really access social media? You might think that everyone has a phone in the world, everyone has an internet connection in the world, but that's not true. Indeed, the statistics is quite surprising. So there are about 7.83 billion people in the world as of January 2021. The number of people who own mobile phones is about 5.22 billion. The number of people who access the internet is 4.66 billion people out of the 7.83 billion. That means about 60% of the world accesses the internet. That tells you, by the way, that 40% of the world does not access the internet, which is a very surprising figure. That's a very high figure of non-access, not non-usage, but non-access. Not everyone who has access uses the internet, but non-access is a very serious matter. What about social media, where about 4.2 billion people use social media in one form or another, about 53% of the world. So the number of mobiles owned is much higher than the number of people who use internet. So 66% of the world use mobiles in the world. These figures cannot be completely exact, There's always going to be some error here and there, but these figures have been collected around January 2021, and it appears that this is the best estimate that we can get. So I'll repeat, 7.83 billion people exist in the world right now. We have 5.22 billion users of mobile phones, 4.66 billion users of the internet, and 4.20 billion people use social media. So, okay, what does all this mean? It means that 40% of the people of the world are still to use digital technology. Now, digital technology has existed since maybe the 80s in a form such that people can use it to some extent in a friendly way. I agree that smartphones did not exist for some time, and they have come around only recently. But and laptops and tablets have come around recently, but it's amazing that 40% of the world still does not have access to any of these things at all. So this has very serious implications, and it's really the implications that we need to think about. It's all very nice to know the statistics, but the issue is, what are the implications? The implications are there for job prospects, which means the economy. There are implications for the healthcare. There are implications for basic banking services, and there are implications for education. So we want to know the implications for education, for health, for economy. These are the parameters by which we need to actually look at the digital divide. Where is India, by the way? I was giving you statistics about the world. Where is India, by the way, in the digital divide? Our situation is not very good. It seems as if it is good because lots of people have mobile phones, but the matter is still not very, very encouraging. So in 2020, India's digital divide remained quite huge, as more than 400 million people still have no access to the internet. Spatial divide is also huge, with the internet density in rural areas where more than 60% of the people live is still low at around 25% compared to the internet density in urban areas. Gender digital divide is also huge. So there's already a rural urban divide. So urban areas, about 90% people have internet access, but in rural areas it's about just about 25% people. So the gender digital divide is also a very big problem. It's about far fewer women with access to mobile phones and internet services than men. And this is true across the world, by the way. It is not just in India. It's true across the world. And what is actually surprising about world figures, which were published in a particular Brookings Institution report, which was written by George Ingram, and this report is quite recent. It's a June 2021 report. It says that the gender divide is actually widening. It's not narrowing. So women in particular have been shortchanged to the benefits of connectivity, with the gender divide in internet use widening, which is very surprising. How could it be widening? Isn't it supposed to be getting lesser? Well, no, it's actually widening. So worldwide, approximately 327 million fewer women than men have a smartphone and can access the mobile internet. In developing countries, women are 22.8% less likely than men to use the internet. The gap worsened by 5 percentage points between 2013 to 2019. This is from the Brookings Institution report of June 2021. So not only do we have a rural urban divide, we have fewer people in rural areas using mobile phones, internet connection, and that's understandable. That's not something that would surprise us. But what would surprise us is that there is a significant gender divide as well. So fewer women use phones than or the internet than men, and this is so even in urban areas. So it is not that this is a rural phenomenon; it's not there in urban areas. This is so even in urban areas. And of course, the situation in Africa is quite grim, and huge efforts are being made in Africa to bring the populations of most of the countries there up to a level where they can start using digital technology for their own benefit. Right, now we need to ask ourselves, what are the causes of the digital divide? But there's no great surprise there. Already existing social inequalities are there in society. So we have poor people in society, we have rich people in society, and so every time there's a technological innovation, it is but natural that the people who have the resources will be able to utilize the technological innovation, whereas those who are struggling to just survive would not be able to use the technological innovation because of course they don't have access to it. So that's just a straightforward question of access. Why does, let's say, a very large population in the US have access to internet and phones and all the other information that's available on the net? It's because they have access, and it's because they are far more richer than developing countries. So there's just a standard notion that, look, there's social inequality, and since there is social inequality and there's global inequality, this global inequality plays out in the digital divide. So the digital divide enhances the global inequality. There's already inequality existing, the digital divide makes it even worse. It kind of brings out the inequality in a bigger way, so to speak. The inequality is already there in some sense. So it kind of adds another aspect to that inequality. Then you have slowness of governments to recognize change. So it takes time for governments to react and change and find out that, okay, there is a technology that has come in. Maybe when you look at a computer first, you don't really seem to think that it's anything particularly important. So nobody probably thought that in the 70s a computer was a very important thing. By the 80s, things started changing. By the 90s, there was a rapid change, and governments in the developing countries had to do a lot of catching up. Then there is resistance to change by many sectors of the population. So the elderly sector of the population would resist change. This may not be so in India because we have fewer elderly people in the population and much larger number of youthful people in the population. And so we have a situation in India where there would very few people would be actually resisting change. And so that's why we have seen the introduction of computers and technology in India in a very, very big way. So, but that's still not, it has still not been the case that India has been able to close the gap in the digital divide. I just read you the statistics. I mean, there are about 400 million people in this country who still have no access. You can forget about the notion of usage here. Usage is, of course, going to be very different from one person to another, from one group to another. But the access itself is a very significant matter. The lack of access is a serious matter for economics. Then there is a question of illiteracy. I may have access, but I am illiterate. I really cannot use a computer. So if I am illiterate, and there's, as all of you know, there's a very serious concern with illiteracy in India. So if a person is illiterate, he cannot use a computer, and so therefore it follows that illiteracy is a major cause of the digital divide. Even if you give access to computers to everyone in the country, that still will not solve the problem of the digital divide. So in Uttar Pradesh, there was an attempt made to give laptops to every student, which is a good thing. There is nothing wrong in that. It's a pretty good attempt to make sure that the digital divide is reduced. But did that lead to any major new change? Now, I do not know of any studies that actually happened that show that a major new change was brought about. Maybe it produced some minor change. But the issue is that we need to also ensure that the usage of these technologies is brought up to mark. So that's a very key element. It's not just access that matters, literacy matters. I need to be able to know what to do with the computer. I need to be able to access it and use it well. That's a very key indication. Also, of course, I need electricity, I need power. So if I don't have electricity and I don't have any way to power my laptop, what am I going to do with the laptop? So that's also an issue. So these are very critical factors in the widening, let us say, of the digital divide. And the fact that there is a digital divide, then you have a wrong model of access as well. So a lot of people think that access is very easy. All you have to do is just buy a computer and that's it. Yeah, but that's not enough. What about usage? If I just don't know what to do with the thing, then it will just lie there like an old radio maybe, and you kind of just turn it on sometimes and you don't know what to do with it, and you type a few words here and there and that's about it. Or you search for something on the internet and that's about it really. You don't use it for educational purposes or to do something much larger like a project, for instance. So, or you don't try to connect with other people in the world. That's an issue that's been hanging there, and this is there in all countries. It's not just a question of developing countries. The wrong model of access was noticed way back in the 1990s and also in the 2000 in the 21st century, and we realized that access has certain models. So there is something called a fire model of access, and you kind of just start a fire and it kind of spreads. And then there is a clothing model of access where that's not the right way of spreading computers. You don't just kind of start a fire and it spreads everywhere. You don't give a computer to everybody, because that doesn't solve the problem. The idea is that computers, when you give it to someone, a farmer is going to use it in one way, a technocrat is going to use it in another way, a student uses it in a very different way. So what you need is something like a clothing model. So these are called social informatics. You cannot simply give a computer to someone and expect something miraculous to happen. You need to understand the needs of the society for that computer to be effective in helping that particular group or that particular person to do anything with it. Having a computer is just not enough. Having the technology is just not enough. That's a very critical aspect of the digital divide. The digital divide is not so much about access. Of course, it is about access, but it's also about usage. So there is a sense in which even if everyone had a computer, that still would not close the digital divide. We would face a significant divide in terms of usage in terms of effective usage. Right, so we have seen some causes of the digital divide. So there's social inequality, there's illiteracy, there's slowness of governments to change, there's resistance in the population, and there is a wrong model of access as well, which is a very significant fact. Now let's look at the consequences of the digital divide. So we have three consequences that we need to look at, which are very significant. There can be n number of consequences. So I want to look at the consequences on the economy, on health, and on education. The one on education is quite an interesting one, and it affects all teachers, as a matter of fact, in a very interesting way. But let's start with the economy. So why should we really care about the digital divide? Suppose I don't really have any digital literacy. How does it matter to me? Well, it matters because jobs need more digital skills. So it's not just that you need to be literate or you need to be a PhD or something like that. No. Yes, you need all those things as well, but you also need to have a little bit of digital literacy. You're not supposed to be frightened when you look at a software or you look at some very complicated kind of hardware. So these skills are largely acquired by those people who have the resources to acquire them, but they are not acquired by those people who don't have either access or who are limited by their usage. And so that's a very significant problem, because if you do not have access and you do not know how to use those resources, this is going to multiply financial inequality. So we already have social inequality because of the push towards digital technologies. We are multiplying financial inequality in a huge way, because those who have resources, who already had resources, they can now multiply their wealth or their jobs, whereas those who do not have the resources and who are already struggling to survive, they are going to struggle to even come up to digital literacy. You can forget about the jobs. I mean, the jobs, since they all need digital literacy, that's going to seriously harm all those people who don't have digital literacy and who cannot get a job even if they're educated. I may be educated, I may have a BA from somewhere, I may have done some schooling, but I can't get a job because I just don't have a certain level of digital literacy. It may not need much digital literacy, but it at least needs some digital literacy. And so companies will always hire people who have at least a little bit of knowledge of computers. And so therefore, financial inequality is bound to rise as the digital gap widens. Then there is, because of the greater use of AI and robotics, we have a situation where we are increasing the number of jobs which are automated. If you employ machines that can do the job, then why would you employ a human being? So even when we are increasing the number of people who have access to computers, that doesn't really mean that we are going to have higher jobs or higher number of jobs. What's going to happen is that as AI and automation rises, companies are going to hire robots, or they will just simply have a robot doing the work. This has happened in South Korea actually, where people have gone in for getting more robots to work, and this has actually led to a situation where the government has put in taxes on companies which are quite prohibitive, so that they actually employ human beings and not robots. Because if all the robots start doing all the work, then what are human beings going to do? So that's going to be a very interesting challenge that the economies are going to face. And economists have already worked out this problem in the sense that they have tried to say that, look, automation is coming, there's really nothing we can do about it, it's something that's just going to happen. It's like the post or the telegraph or the telephone or electricity. It's going to spread in the world. There's really nothing you can do to stop this technology from taking over. And there are basic skills that any automotive system can do, and that's all that you need in an office. And so this stuff is just going to run across the world. Companies are going to get more and more automated, and there will be fewer and fewer and fewer jobs available. If that's the case, then what we are going to need is basic minimum income. Everyone in the society is supposed to get some sort of income. Otherwise, very few people would have jobs and they would have no income. That would lead to a rather complex situation for the economy, and you don't want that kind of situation to happen. Therefore, you would like definitely for everyone to have basic minimum income. That's a thought. No nation has ever implemented this, but if you look at the next 30 years, more and more nations are going to start at least thinking about such a situation, because automation is going to happen. So not only do we have a digital divide which is going to increase financial inequality, there is also the issue of the fact that because of increasing automation, greater and greater and greater number of jobs are going to get lost to automation. And so therefore, we are bound to need some way of surviving, and for that we need some kind of basic minimum income. Exactly what human beings would do if all work disappeared is another issue that we can't get into, because that's too much into the future. But definitely governments will have to think a little bit about basic minimum income, unless they can stave off automation. That's possible if governments take decisions about what to do with automated services, where to introduce them, so that there is not much major job loss. But then let's look at cryptocurrencies. Now, El Salvador just recently in September, they officially introduced cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are basically, you can call it e-money if you want. It's just a kind of currency it's not regulated by any government, and these currencies are getting to be very, very popular. The US government has said that they do not want to control this thing as of now, and El Salvador is probably the first country in the world to actually legalize cryptocurrency. It's not legalized in India, but it's very obvious that this currency is becoming more and more popular in the world. But again, if you do not have access to a computer, you don't know how to use it, or you do not have access to a smartphone and you do not know how to use it, you are just out of the picture in some sense regarding a growing tendency of people to use cryptocurrencies. I won't be very surprised if in the next 5 to 6 years, e-money would be very popular in India, authorized by the government. And I think the government is already planning to bring in some element of e-money into the economy. And they may not call it cryptocurrency, but it is crypto in the sense that it is run by cryptography and blockchain and whatever. So cryptocurrencies are bound to come in, but in case you don't have technology to handle it, if about 400 million people in India don't have a smartphone and they don't use the internet, how are they going to get onto this economic benefit? Or no, it's not necessary that it's a benefit, but how are they going to use this thing for any kind of purpose at all? So the more technology is rushing in, the more the people who are bereft of access or usage are going to suffer economically. I do not mean that they are going to suffer in a mental way or any other thing like that, but they are going to suffer economically, which is a very significant suffering. And therefore, we will have to look into all these issues if we have to think about how to manage this situation of the digital divide. Just like we think of providing electricity to everyone, it would be very strange for a government to go slow on that issue. No government in the world is like this. Everyone wants that electricity is provided to all the people in the country. In the same way, we will have to set up a kind of decision-making mechanism where we need digital access and proper usage to every single aspect and every locality of the country. Nobody should be missed out, because if you miss out on it, you are going to miss out on future jobs, and you are going to miss out on the using of various kinds of currency that have become very, very popular in the world and which are becoming legal. And so therefore, once the legality comes in, a very vast number of population in the world, in not just India but in the world. But I said already, 40 to 50% of the people in the world do not have access to digital technology. That's a very significant number. The United Nations has also raised serious worry about this issue, because this access is absolutely necessary now. Just like access to electricity is considered absolutely necessary. Think of there being a power cut for, let's say, 24 hours. It would make you very restless and very, very unhappy. In the same way, not having access to computers is going to make people less and less powerful and less able to contribute to any kind of economic development. So, there's going to be greater pressure on governments to implement and make sure that the digital divide comes to, or at least it is lessened. It cannot come to an end. That's probably that's going to be very, very difficult to do. But at least it should be lessened as much as possible if you want people to participate in a meaningful manner in the economy. One can also accept, we can expect, as it has happened in El Salvador just last month in September 2021, there has been a lot of social unrest. You can also expect with the introduction of cryptocurrency as a legal tender. So, in the same way, we can expect that as the digital divide grows, or even if it lessens, we can expect a fair amount of social unrest. People are not sure what kind of technology is this. Why do they have to use legal cryptocurrencies? Like, what's wrong with just using physical currency? Or what is the status of the legal currency vis-a-vis the physical currency? So, all these issues are going to play out in politics and economics and in all kinds of ways in society. So, society will be very much deeply engaged in all these issues, and you can expect some serious social upheaval in those countries where uh, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is a very serious one. Take Venezuela. Venezuela, about 77% people are in a very serious condition of economic depression, and that's, I'm putting this quite mildly actually. I mean, their condition is quite bad. So, in such countries, if you introduce cryptocurrency or introduce computers on a large scale, it's going to lead to very significant social upheavals. And so we can expect political turmoil, which can also, which obviously has, it has an impact on the economy as well. So, all in all, in the economy, first and foremost, you cannot participate in the economy if you don't have digital literacy. You need literacy, the A, B, C, D kind of literacy, but you also need digital literacy. So, that's the first point. Secondly, governments are bound to be seriously worried about increasing automation, which will lead to much larger layoffs. And so, that's going to put a lot of pressure on governments to introduce basic minimum income. And this is something that developed countries, not developing countries, but developed countries are already thinking along these lines, because there is pressure from their economists who are looking at the whole situation, and they think that basic minimum income is a significant requirement, at least for the future, not today, but at least for the future. So, the economy is going to have a very interesting shape in the time to come, and this interesting shape need not be a welcome shape, but it is an interesting shape in the sense of the politics and the way things are going to play out. It's something that we all need to watch as academics, and just as people who are interested in what's happening in the world, what's happening in India, what's happening across the world about the digital divide. The digital divide is a significant one, just like the electrical divide, in the sense that I may not have electricity and you may have electricity. That's a power divide, and that's a very significant divide. All of you know that, but the digital divide is an even more significant divide, and that's going to play out in very interesting ways. All right, what about health? So, people have pointed out that because of increasing automation and increasing use of technology in medicine, we are going to have a situation where those who are digitally literate, who are able to access a computer or a smartphone, they will have much better access to medical services, whereas those who do not have a computer or a smartphone, they will have far lesser access to uh, basic medical services, because since everything is going to get automated, you are bound to need some sort of electronic system by which you are able to access a hospital. And this is already happening in India, where you're going to get a national digital health ID, and it's still in its infancy, but you can see that the government is planning towards the future, and you can see that it is going to be a digital thing straight away. It's not like I have a physical card and I can go somewhere and do something with it. No, you will have a digital card, you will have a digital ID, and with that you will be able to access medical services.